From Turner Broadcasting System, this is Cable News Network.
This is Prime News. Reporting in Atlanta, Lou Dobbs. And on the anchor desk in Washington, Bernard Shaw.
Good evening. I'm Lou Dobbs. We'd like to welcome our new viewers from the Satellite News Channel at 6 o'clock Eastern Time tonight. SNC signed off the air, and Turner Broadcasting System acquired the right to supply former SNC viewers with Cable News Network or CNN Headline News. We'd like to welcome you. Bernie?
President Reagan says U.S. Marines invaded Grenada to prevent the nightmare of the Iran hostage situation from being repeated on that small Caribbean island. In a nationally televised address carried live by CNN, Mr. Reagan also insisted that the military coup in Grenada had endangered the security of the other island nations in that region. And when the American forces landed, the president said they found evidence that, quote, a Cuban occupation of the island had been planned.
2 hours ago, we released the first photos from Grenada. They included pictures of a warehouse of military equipment, one of 3 we've uncovered so far. This warehouse contained weapons and ammunition stacked almost to the ceiling, enough to supply thousands of terrorists. Grenada, we were told, was a friendly island paradise for tourism. Well, it wasn't. It was a Soviet-Cuban colony being readied as a major military bastion to export terror and undermine democracy. We got there just in time.
Mr. Reagan also accused the Russians of encouraging violence in Grenada and supporting a, quote, network of surrogates and terrorists. The president said he intends to get the American forces off the island as soon as possible, but he did not indicate how much longer they would have to stay there. Lou?
Bernie, American intelligence sources now say a number of hostages are being held on the southern part of Grenada. Those sources say the hostages are being held by General Hudson Austin. He was the head of the military regime that overthrew the government of Prime Minister Maurice Bishop. The number of hostages and their nationality is not known at this time. Reporters were allowed on the island of Grenada for the first time today, and we are expecting a report from our correspondent on the island. We'll bring that to you as soon as we have it. Bernie?
The Pentagon today released pictures it took of the American invasion of Grenada. Our correspondent, Charles Bierbauer, is standing by live right now at the Pentagon. Charles?
Bernie, just a few minutes ago, to follow on what Lou said about reporters getting onto the island today, just a few minutes ago we were told that those reporters, a pool gathering of American press who were allowed to go see for themselves what was happening on Grenada, they are still on the island because the aircraft which they were going to use to get back to Barbados has been diverted to evacuate wounded from the island, so there may be some delay in getting any of our actual pictures from the island itself. The only pictures we've seen so far have come from the Defense Department. Indeed, this has been a small war about which we have heard more than we have actually seen. But this afternoon, the Pentagon released pictures which it had taken itself, that is to say they were taken by military cameramen. They were edited by the Pentagon, and in the final step, they were cleared by the White House. On the island of Grenada, we do not actually see much of the fighting itself, but this would have been yesterday. There you will see some of the artillery. And these are Black Hawk helicopters, some of the gunships which were used. Indeed, the U.S. lost 2 helicopters. 3 of them were hit. One managed to get back to its mother ship. There are still an estimated 3,000 American military personnel on the island, Rangers and Marines and airborne troops. And the major thing which we have learned today, as you just heard the President report, is that there was this major cache of weapons, Soviet-made, some with Soviet markings, some with Cuban markings. Enough, as one intelligence officer put it, thousands of weapons, millions of rounds of ammunition, enough to keep a battalion going for a month. Some anti-aircraft weapons seen here. It was, in the words of National Security Advisor Robert McFarland, an extraordinary discovery. McFarland put it also saying that the U.S. had gotten there just in time. Just in time, apparently, also to rescue many of the American students at the St. George's University Medical Hospital. And a medical school there. These pictures, again, taken by the Pentagon, by military cameramen yesterday. And these students.
Canadian Embassy, United States Embassy. We're here to make sure you guys get home tonight.
And so, Bernie, those were the first pictures to come off the island of Grenada. And those pictures, not brought to you by any of the television networks, but brought to you by the Pentagon through their cameras, their editors. That's how we've seen them. Bernie?
Thank you, Charles. As soon as the pool crews on the island of Grenada, representing all of the North American television networks, return, once that plane ferrying out those people who are wounded, those military people who are wounded, as soon as they go back in and get the press corps and bring them back out and transmit from Barbados, of course, Cable News Network will present those pictures to you as quickly as possible. Lou?
Bernie, one of the soldiers involved in the invasion of Grenada says most of that island's defenders threw down their weapons when they saw U.S. troops, but a few continued to battle. 8 American soldiers have been killed in the invasion. 8 are missing. 39 others have been wounded. Last night, an Army spokesman said 25 wounded servicemen arrived at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. All 25 tonight are reported to be in stable condition. Tonight in Cuba, people are angry about the American-led invasion of Grenada. CNN correspondent Peter Arnett reports.
Cubans awoke in a stormy, perplexed mood. The crisis that involved at least 700 Cuban military advisors and technicians in Grenada was over. But the news was bad. 100 of them still unaccounted for, some known to be dead. Every Cuban had a comment. Norma Cruz Batista sorrowed over the loss of life. Juan Valdez Hernandez was bitter because he said the Cubans were in Grenada to help people. David Lopez Suarez was proud of the way the Cubans fought. Carmen Luisa Otura said she could volunteer her 3 sons to fight and die for the Cubans if asked. And whenever U.S. news crews assembled, so did the crowds, shouting their displeasure at American policy. But grief knows no politics. Hundreds of Cuban families are waiting anxiously to learn the fate of their loved ones caught up in the Grenada violence. The sisters of Cuban construction engineer Jose Rodriguez Lanez feared for his life because fighting was heavy at the Grenada airport where he worked. Friends gathered to comfort them at their modest suburban Havana home. Ana Lanez read from the last letter of her brother. He expressed pride at working to help an ally of Cuba.
A pesar de que hablaban otro idioma, pero se entendían muy bien y que trabajaban codo con él, se dice buscar aquí.
He was very happy, and there was a great understanding between Cuban and Grenadian, besides they speak different languages.
Was your brother ready to sacrifice his life in Grenada? The Cuban people have suffered through far higher casualties than their many other foreign involvements, particularly in Africa. But these have been all far from home. Havana has not been affected. The American action in invading the neighboring Cuban ally of Grenada underscores the dire political prophecies of Cuban leader Fidel Castro. He has warned his people for years that the United States is their implacable enemy. Peter Arnett, CNN, Havana, Cuba.
The United Nations Security Council has delayed taking a vote on a resolution concerning the invasion of Grenada. Earlier today, the Security Council debated the resolution which calls for the immediate withdrawal of all foreign forces from Grenada. During this debate, the United States formally challenged the credentials of the diplomat currently representing Grenada.
It is my understanding that you are in possession of a communication addressed to you on yesterday by the Governor General of Grenada, the Honorable Sir Paul Schoon, which raises in my mind a question as to whether the gentleman now seated at this table with the designation Grenada is properly seated.
The Security Council has taken a recess while the Secretary General, Javier Perez de Cuellar, considers the question of the credentials of the Grenadian representative. Lou?
Bernie, several protesters were arrested today in New York when they tried to block the U.S. mission to the United Nations. About a dozen demonstrators marched outside the mission building. They protested the American-led invasion of Grenada. When the activists sat down inside the building, police were called in. They made several arrests.
There was movement on Capitol Hill today to invoke the War Powers Act in response to the American invasion in Grenada. Some lawmakers are charging this is the second time in a month President Reagan has bypassed the authority of Congress. Carol Week has more.
The resolution calls for the clock to start running on how long President Reagan can keep U.S. forces in Grenada without congressional approval. Under the War Powers Act, that's 60 to 90 days. The Foreign Affairs Committee vote was overwhelming, 32-2 in favor of the resolution. But the sentiment over whether the action in Grenada was right was mixed.
We must not be left solely in every case where we are involved only after the fact.
If all of the Congress had been consulted on this matter, I can assure you there wouldn't have been 6 American lives lost there. There would have been 50,000 Cubans waiting there for us. And there wasn't.
Time will show and history will show that what's happened here is that this administration has broken the law. And they've done it in an invidious and an insidious and an invisible way.
I think there's been plenty of justification, and I think when history is written on this incident, they'll look back and say it was one of the United States' finest hours.
The committee defeated a move to limit the forces in Grenada to 30 days. A spokesman for Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Clement Zablocki says he hopes to have the resolution on the floor Monday, and it's expected to pass easily. But there's a feeling in Congress, backed up by assurances from the Reagan administration, that there's no intention of keeping the forces in Grenada for the full 90 days. So a confrontation with the White House is unlikely. Carol Week, CNN, Capitol Hill.
Our correspondent Mike Betcher is now live on the phone on the island of Barbados. Mike, can you bring us up to date on events?
Probably the last major battle of this short but rather intense war is being waged at the moment in about the middle of the island of Grenada. We were at the Point Salinas Airport on the southern tip of Grenada, the airport that was built by the Cuban government. And as we were there about 3:30 in the afternoon, U.S. paratroops got onto helicopters. Artillery opened up on a Cuban position about 3 miles away. Offshore batteries also opened up. There were A-6 and A-7 attack aircraft strafing the Cuban positions. One military commander, U.S. military commander, said there were 500 Cubans surrounded at that spot. And a rather huge battle erupted as Marines tried to take the Cuban position, as well as paratroopers, Marines from the north, paratroopers from the south. This appears to be the last major pocket of resistance on the island, although we were told by natives on the island and also by other military people and people who had, other journalists who had snuck on the island by sea at one point or another, that Grenadian Army soldiers had changed into civilian clothes and told them they would mix into the population and return to fight as soon as the U.S. forces left. So at the moment, there is a rather large battle going on. It was still being waged as we left. You could see flashes of artillery fire not far away. There were some American casualties. One was medevaced out, we believe, to San Juan, Puerto Rico. Other than that, we don't have many details on casualty counts.
Mike, if you would, we've just received a rather disquieting bulletin from United Press International in which there is a report that there are 1,000 Cubans involved in that battle that you're describing at Port Salinas. Can you shed any light on that?
Well, I was told there were 500. Certainly, even if there were 1,000, they are rather outnumbered. The U.S. forces have superior firepower. Apparently, what they are guarding is the last major ammunition dump on the island of Grenada. I saw something, Grenada, excuse me. I saw something rather amazing today I didn't expect to see when we arrived there. There were huge warehouses full of AK-47s, Russian ammunition, other Russian submachine guns, shells, everything packed into warehouses, and I saw 5 filled with this sorts of ammunition at the airstrip, near the airstrip where the Cubans had been constructing the strip. Apparently, there's another one just like it, and even bigger, according to U.S. military sources, where the Cubans are right now, where there are reports, as you say, 1,000. I was told by a U.S. colonel there were 500 there. So it was rather interesting, and the military officials there tell us that ammunition was bound for other countries in Latin America to be used by insurgents in those countries. And it would make sense. It was more weaponry than a small Grenadian army could have used, that's for sure.
Mike, we understand that the aircraft that was to be bringing out the videotape shot there by the correspondents for the major networks, including yourself, had to be delayed for medevac use to evacuate wounded. Have you got any sense of the casualties that have been incurred by U.S. troops there?
They are very casualty conscious. There were apparently 6 to 8 Marines killed in the last 2 days, Marines and paratroopers, and about 20 or so wounded. I had to recheck my notes on that. I just rushed into the door. But this evening, one soldier of the 82nd Airborne was carried in the dark by us by 2 of his comrades. He'd been shot through the back and through the neck and was being airlifted out, and that was the delay in our arriving back here, and certainly he should have been air-vac'd out as soon as possible. He was in pretty serious shape. Others we don't know about. There were about 4 Army.
From Turner Broadcasting System, this is Cable News Network.